Hello, I'm Christopher Doty, the producer of this special Rogers presentation, Lost April, the Flood of '37. There was a time when this park in South London was a residential area, and it was here that the people living on Front Street watched the Thames River begin to rise. Of course, that wasn't an unusual occurrence in 1937. Many people still remembered the great flood of 1883 that killed 17 people, and the river had risen dangerously at least 5 times since then. But there was also a belief that the city's engineering department had solved the problem. Only 10 years earlier, Professor Fred Landon spoke for many Londoners when he wrote that the existence of breakwaters prevented any possibility from another flood in the west end of the city. For anyone who lived near the river, the events of April 26, 1937, would tell a tragically different story.
The end of 1936 saw a heavy snowfall in London, Ontario. Christmas was unusually warm, and the mild streak continued into the new year. Ice on the Thames River broke up early, causing minor flooding in January. But by April, the flood scares were over, and Londoners were looking towards a pleasant spring. The frost was almost out of the ground, and the snow and ice had disappeared. And then, it started to rain.
WEAF, New York.
The Jell-O program, starring Jack Benny, with Mary Livingston, Phil Harris, Kenny Baker, and yours truly, Don Wilson.
Since midnight Saturday, a mixture of snow and rain had been falling on the 76,000 people who lived in London. Many were sitting down to dinner. Others were tuned to the radio. Most were getting ready for another Monday. This is the story of 4 London neighborhoods that only had one thing in common. They were all near the Thames River. Aubrey Federley owned one of the newest and most beautiful homes in North London. The Bell Telephone executive had custom-built his house a year earlier. It featured inlaid hardwood floors, 2 all-marble bathrooms, 3 fireplaces, and a cedar-lined attic. Since the early 1930s, a series of luxury homes had sprung up along Richmond Street, as London's well-to-do took advantage of the area's low tax rate. The wealthy settled in next door to working-class families who had lived in the area for 2 decades.
Everybody had the same allowance. You know, it didn't matter who you were, you got 25 cents a week, and that was about it. There was never any, I don't think, any distinction about money to any degree.
I had two dogs, one an English setter and the other a Cocker Spaniel. I used to love to take these dogs over to the field to try to train them to be good hunters. That's Mayfair Drive now, which was just a straight open field. Between Mayfair Drive and Bernard Avenue was a mill race.
Bruffdale had been built around a bend in the river. Years earlier, a channel had been cut through it to power a nearby mill. Although the mill was gone, this mill race remained, isolating the top part of the neighborhood on a triangle of land. Federley's home was at the northern tip of this triangle, on ground that had once been the bank of the river. Because the house was so new, the earth around the foundation hadn't settled, making it vulnerable to water erosion.
I remember when I was a kid, waking up in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, the machine guns would be going off right outside the front of the house.
The noise of machine guns was music to Captain John Thomas Gore. After a disastrous career as a farmer, the World War I veteran had moved his family to London, where he became the caretaker of the Cove's rifle ranges. A few yards away, Developers were trying to sell Springbank Drive as London's newest suburb. Thanks in part to the noise from Captain Gore's rifle range, construction had fallen off. The area remained an odd mixture of brick houses, factories, and wetlands.
If it was a wet summer, we used to have water down at the end. The boys would build rafts and go in and around on these rafts. It was a great place to grow up.
The Army had put a bunch of bullets in one of the coves, the first coves, and some of the kids were diving in there, getting these bullets out and lighting a fire by a tree, and stand behind the tree and put the bullet in there, and it would go off with a bang and whistle, you know, away somewhere.
We used to have a school picnic every year in Springbank Park, where all the schools in the City of London would go down to Springbank on the same day, have races and games, and then go over to the amusement park. There was a little train in Springbank Park. Everybody had to ride the little train.
The Coves was named after a former bend in the river that circled the neighborhood. Over the years, water flow through the area had declined, creating a swampy area. No one expected it would ever become an active part of the river again.
I remember the days before the flood, when the river was rising, people saying, "We haven't had a flood for 50 years, there's not going to be another flood. We've seen water across the road there before, but it usually just goes away." Well, it was quite a nice neighborhood. Everybody was very proud of their homes. They all had gardens, they all had flower beds, and it was just a nice area to live in.
Jim and Jeanette Budson had moved to 108 Front Street in 1934. He was a retired carpenter, fireman, machinist, and farmer. She continued to work to supplement her husband's meager government pension. Both planned on spending their retirement next door to their only living daughter.
Grandma worked at Parkwood Hospital, when it was on Grand Ave. And then Lapwich Butcher Shop used to be over in Ottawa Ave at that time. It's South Street now. And Grandpa used to walk in. They had the dogs and the cat, the dog and cats they had. And they never fed them raw meat. Grandpa would go up to Lapwich's and buy hamburger and come home and cook it. Never got raw meat, never.
We used to go to different neighbors' homes on Saturday nights, and the adults would play cards, the kids would get together and be in one room and play games, and then there was always the lunch and all the desserts afterwards. So we were allowed to have coffee once in a while.
Front Street had been built in the middle of an industrial area. Nearby companies included McClary Steel, the London Soap Company, the Beatty Brothers Foundry, and S.F. Lorison, maker of ammonia and cleaning powders. Most of their waste products ended up in the river.
McClary's used to dump the scrap metal over the bank in the river. And some of it got washed down past what we call the islands. Well, in the middle of this bend in the river, it was deep, and there was a big boulder in the center of it, So we used to go jump off the boulder. Well, I was hooked onto a piece of scrap galvanized metal and slit my leg open.
Front Street was also on a floodplain. Ice from the Thames washed up in backyards every spring, and basements were frequently flooded. The city had allowed a breakwater at the end of the street to deteriorate, while landfill from across the river had increased the strength of the current. Of the 50 homes on Front Street, the Butsons was the closest to the river.
Now, once again, let me present that Southern gentleman, Kay Kaiser.
Thank you very much, Mel. Some time ago on these programs...
I have a natural fear of water because I can't swim. And that was caused by a childhood incident. So that, I never felt that I wanted to be in the water, but I always wanted to be beside it.
Betty Callow had moved to 9 Napier Street with her family after emigrating from the Isle of Man a year earlier. The first few months had been rough on the family, but that spring, James Callow found a job as a carpenter for the city. He immediately purchased a new radio.
My mother loved it. She said it was the only place she'd ever lived that really reminded her of home. And of course, there was the attraction of the water, and we had a nice garden and an apple tree in the backyard, and you could just walk over the hill and you were right down at the river.
West London was created by the river. The only way residents could enter and leave was by one of 4 bridges. The area had suffered from a disastrous flood in 1883 when a freak cloudburst caused the Thames to jump its banks, drowning 17 people. Over the years, a series of breakwaters had been built. They had protected London West for over half a century and had sparked a building boom. These breakwaters also reduced the river's ability to store water during a severe flood. But that hadn't been a problem for years.
For about a week before it actually happened, I can remember going up with flashlights at night. Quite exciting because we're getting reports of how high the Thames was up along the breakwater. I can still see that looking down with a flashlight and seeing the river rushing by. Normally it'd be about 20 feet down. And here it was about 2 feet below the lip of the breakwater.
There were 3 children in the Callow family, the same number of children that had drowned on Napier Street in 1883.
This is just when they had thought everything was coming around, you know, wonderful, and my father was happy in his work, and, you know, we were all healthy, and it looked like everything was going off wonderfully well. That's life, isn't it? You can never tell.
We are signing off now, the time being a half minute past the half hour past 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, to return to the air at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Until that time, good night and good morning.
It didn't rain, it poured for 2 straight weeks. Just poured. Yeah, just poured. I've never seen it rain so hard in my life. Oh my God, it was just that. The wipers wouldn't take it off the windshield. You're just looking through rain all the time. Yeah, 2 straight weeks, night and day. That started, boy, I'll tell you. Oh, geez.
Over 4 inches of rain had fallen over the weekend. Another 2 inches was on its way. The heavy rainfall should have been soaked up by farms upstream, but the fields were saturated. There was almost total runoff into the Thames.
All that water had to get to the river. So here were the farmers tiling their land, getting the water to the ditches, and that was just the same as pulling a plug in the bathtub.
At City Hall, regular business was put on hold to deal with the flood danger. Off-duty firemen were called back. Police officers were given extra shifts. PUC employees were taken off their regular jobs and told to start sandbagging in West London. Bricks were thrown around bridges to strengthen their supports. The river was 6 feet from the top of the breakwater.
The first sign I had that anything was likely to be serious was the morning I rode my bike to school. I was going to Central Collegiate, across Blackfriars Bridge and up the hill, and the river had been high for the past 2 or 3 days, but that particular day, I think it had been snowing a little bit in the morning. Certainly there had been wet snow coming down, and the river was very high. We'd been looking at it probably for more than a day, but I remember thinking it was awfully close to the bridge as I went over.
Paramount is on the air.
Like Kingsley Ferguson, the rest of London was having a regular day.
Sparkling eyes, smiling lips, dancing feet. This is your moment on the air.
Several miles north of London, the Avon River broke over its dam, flooding roadways and homes in Stratford and backing up storm sewers. The Avon joined the Thames River outside of St. Mary's.